The number one priority is, of course, weapons. Saying weapons, I mean we need all capabilities, from artillery to air defense systems. 400 years of Russian propaganda is 400 years of Russian propaganda.
That's it.
During the first week, we heard questions on the air. Here they say that Kyiv will fall in 3 days. These people who were taking children and women out to Poland and then returning, this incredible mutual assistance within the country enabled our entire diplomatic team to make a huge breakthrough here as well. This is a crime that a normal person can't even understand. How can this be done? Who are these people who kidnap children?
This country, this is kidnapping.
Who are these moms who are kidnapping children? When we saw this, that's why we see Ukrainian flags everywhere. That's why American people kept telling their politicians, no, 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 we cannot leave such a terrible act of injustice unanswered.
Oksana Markarova is the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Ukraine to the United States of America, the first female ambassador to the United States in the history of Ukraine. From June 2018 to March 2020, she served as Minister of Finance of Ukraine. For her significant personal contribution to the development of interstate cooperation and effective diplomatic activity, she was awarded the Order of Princess Olga Third Class. She is married, her husband is a well-known banker and businessman Danilo Volynets. The family has 4 children.
All conscious Ukrainians now live by the principle you are in the armed forces or work for the armed forces of Ukraine. The person we flown to Washington to see today is working tirelessly to ensure that Americans don't get tired of helping Ukraine in its unequal struggle against the Muscovites.
Україні у її нерівній боротьбі з московитами.
My name is Svitlana Leontieva, and today we'll be looking for a point of support with the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Ukraine to the United States of America, Oksana Markarova. Good afternoon, Mrs. Markarova, and thank you so much for your time, which is worth its weight in gold.
Ms. Leontieva, it's a pleasure to welcome you in Washington, D.C., and especially in the Ukrainian House.
How did you find out here in Washington that the unspoken moratorium on providing Ukraine with F-16s has been called off? I'm sure you had a lot to do with it, since you were one of the first to know. What was it like? How did it happen?
You know, in fact, this is actually the result of a lot of work by an incredible big team. These discussions began right on the 24th and 25th of February, since F-16s were among the very first requests when we said what we would need for this fight.
A year and a half ago.
Yes, that is our needs, which were then formed by the General Staff and the Defense Ministry, which were sent through all embassies, were strike aircraft. It was not immediately claimed as specific capabilities, but strike aircraft, helicopters, airplanes were initially a task for all military attachés and embassies to work on as well. Of course, as you know, we started at a time when Stingers and Javelins were state-of-the-art, and breakthrough capabilities that we had just received, in fact, for the first time since December-January in such numbers. So requests for F-16s were quite before that. If we remember, the planes from the United States started arriving every day, every week in January. It was a very powerful advocacy visit in which our pilots also participated, and Jews as well, who tragically died recently.
Huge tragedy.
That was here with our very active female advocates of weapons. On that day, Ms. Miroshevska was with him and a number of our other activists who were constantly advocating for weapons here, and those were the pilots who were advocating for the F-16s. I mean, then I had a model on my desk that they gave me. And of course, at that time, well, a year ago or a little over a year ago, the answer was rather no than yes. However, we didn't abandon our efforts. It was a constant issue raised by President Zelensky at his level, the Minister of Defense, the General Staff in every call. It was constant work, which initially came to find in platforms coming to the common ground on training and granting permission. And today we have this coalition which is actually discussing.
But how did you find out?
Well, we have one line of inquiry. The Pentagon informs us, then we inform Kyiv.
And by the way, who were you the first to inform? The president? How often do you communicate with him personally now?
Well, when it is necessary, let's say. Of course, every time we receive information about new packages, and they are actually allocated every week, my attaché and I immediately inform everyone at home accordingly. I inform the president, the Minister of Defense, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
You mentioned the pilots with the call sign Jews, and of course, that tragedy in the sky. It took the life of someone who was advocating and wanted to switch from a MiG-29 to an F-16. What do you remember about him from your last meeting?
Що запам'яталося з останньої зустрічі?
He was an extremely bright, uncompromising, and very active person.
Andriy Pilshikov, the pilots of the 40th
There
Brigade.
even were some points we argued about when we met.
Really?
Yes, about attack drones back then. It was a very, very substantive meeting despite the young age, a very substantive meeting. When you see a person who is not only a professional in their field, but whose soul hurts, burns, who wants, it's an extremely great loss.
Ви неодноразово казали, що
You have repeatedly said that you live and work on the unspoken instructions of President Zelensky to work harder and faster.
нашого Володимира Зеленського. От що зараз
What is the most urgent and necessary thing now? Because we need a weapon of victory.
зброя перемоги?
We need everything now. I understand that this is a vague answer, but let me explain a little bit now. The number one priority, of course, is weapons. Saying weapons, I mean we need all the capabilities from artillery to air defense system, I mean everything.
Demining systems as well.
Of course, we are confronting an enemy that is much larger in number, more brutal, and will stop at nothing. We have done the incredible. Our defenders had surprised the whole world since February 24, 222 and continues to surprise them every day. But in order for us to win completely, we still need a lot of capabilities. Therefore, in terms of weapons, we need everything. We need the entire line of capabilities that only might be handy. And we need to find it, test it, deliver it. It's a huge process.
Логістика – це
But what is the most difficult part of this work?
Everything. It's impossible to single out something. For this, we need this whole big team, both in Ukraine and outside Ukraine, all our friends. Of course, the United States takes a lead in arms issues. This whole team needs to work together to find and provide weapons to Ukraine. Thank God today, when we are meeting with you, there are practically no red lines and no political decisions that would prevent us from getting something.
будуть нам давати, їх, практично немає.
You have already overcome everything.
We have overcome everything together, I mean, it's teamwork. But there are issues of access, production speed, location, and so on and so forth. This is a big process. And we need not only weapons. We spend all the money that Ukraine earns on its own on the salaries of the military and this sector. Everything else, from pensions to medical care to teachers' salaries to assistance to displaced people, in our budget is funded by our partners.
Так, я
Yes, I know. My next question is about the fact that we know that there are financial sectors and humanitarian aid sectors. So, in the financial sector,
I should say that the bulk of financial aid is direct budgetary aid. This is actually the money that the United States gives us in the budget for pensions and salaries.
they replenish our economics.
And the United States gives them to us, unlike all other partners, in the form of grants.
Gratuitously.
It's not a loan, we don't have to pay them back. And irrevocably. That is all the funds, for example, 113 billion that Congress had allocated, 70 billion of which have already been provided in the form of either weapons again on the free and non-refundable basis, or direct budgetary support, or humanitarian support, reconstruction, energy sector.
We know what it means. We have a lot of bombed-out enterprises and our energy sector needs to be constantly restored. There is still more to do. And We don't know what the winter will be like, and the Americans agree to help us.
Yes, and last winter, if you look at it, it was the coordinated work of the Congress, which allocated funds, and the Department of Energy and the State Department, which in active cooperation with USAID and our ministries met these needs quite quickly. It's not easy either. Transformers, various energy equipment, which like weapons are not just put on a shelf somewhere in a store and wait to be taken out of there. It has to be specially ordered. We managed to find a lot of equipment in other countries together with our partners, and the United States brought and delivered it for us. Of course, we need more. Look, I'm absolutely grateful to the American people, to President Biden, to the administration, to all partners in Congress for what we have already received, but we need more in each of these categories: weapons, direct budgetary aid, and humanitarian aid. And that's why the key task of the embassy now is to work with Congress on additional changes to the budget that the administration, the White House, has already submitted to Congress.
For 2024.
For 224. But let us explain to our viewers that 224 in the United States starts on October 1st. The request that had been submitted to Congress is a request for funding for the last quarter of this calendar year. These are the funds that we need from October 1st and the weapons that we need from October 1st.
Are the United States preparing something like that? Because we all dream of Ukraine's victory, something like a Marshall Plan to rebuild Ukraine. Or maybe there are some businesses that already cooperate with Ukraine and they are ready and planning to come and to help us rebuild our country, because so much has been destroyed.
We are actually preparing this plan together, and I'm very glad that we have such a platform. The United States has actively started helping us in all areas, from military, budgetary, humanitarian aid to sanctions against Russia, which are constantly being strengthened. Again, there's a lot more to be done, and we are working on it. But it is also quite powerful. In all of these areas, the United States is not only doing this bilaterally, but is also assembling a coalition of friends who are doing this together with them. We have the Ramstein group, as you know, where more than 50 countries meet to discuss exactly what our arms needs are. We have an energy coordination group where the G7 Plus is involved. That is not only the group of 7 countries, but also international financial organizations. In fact, sometimes these meetings are held every week to coordinate, not to duplicate efforts, and so on. And now the platform for the future reconstruction, co-chaired by Ukraine, the United States, the European Union, and the country that holds the presidency of the Group of 7, has already begun to take action. And the internal structure of the institutions that will discuss our future reconstruction, as well as the rapid reconstruction that we are already doing, is being created very actively.
Not simultaneously.
It is extremely important to do this right now. Of course, the priority and the main task now is to win. But when we win, we have to start recovering right away, because we won't have time to really get into the swing of things, and we need to do it very quickly. That's why this group, which includes the Deputy Prime Minister for Restoration, but of course the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister, also play a big role in this group and are actively involved in these issues. So, in fact, a large team in the Cabinet of Ministers is very important for developing all these decisions for the future.
As we're speaking, a major cardiac congress is taking place here in Washington, D.C. And I'm proud that Ukraine is represented at this cardiac congress by delegations of 2 major Ukrainian institutes that are making presentations. This is the Mosov National Institute, led by academician Vasil Lazarishnets, and the Center for Pediatric Cardiology and Cardiac Surgery, led by Ilya Yemets, who has already made his representation. Also, there are other teams of cardiologists and cardiac surgeons with them. In particular, they will talk about the challenges of wartime, especially in the field of pediatric cardiology. Do such congresses and this perception of Ukraine help you work with the American audience? Do they change their opinion about Ukraine? Do they perceive Ukraine as a country of high technology and science?
The short answer is that they definitely help. I mean, our cardiologists are people with hearts of gold and golden hands, whom we are all adore and adored even before the full-scale phase of the war. But what they do, being actually under threat, sometimes without electricity, inspires not only respect, and not only the respect for Ukrainians, but also is a unique experience that once again confirms the incredible skill and incredible humanity for our surgeons. When they are here, and we can already hear the echoes since work of this delegation began, it helps a lot, because in fact there are several other ambassadors here now who, in addition to me, constantly not only talk about their professional achievements, but also promote the issues for Ukraine, talking about Ukraine, telling what it means to be a Ukrainian, why we are fighting. In fact, this is very important, because not only working with the Congress, not only working with the administration, with our official partners yields results. The United States is a democracy. They will help us as much as they feel that the American people want to help us. All of these visits, our cardiologists to Congress, our singers, our volunteers, our priests who go to their brothers and sisters in the church and testify, and our athletes, they are all very important. And each of them finds a response in the heart of some other audience, some other Americans, because we can't reach everyone from Washington. So we are very grateful to everyone who comes to us with such professional advocacy and cultural programs, because even if they don't deal with weapons themselves, each of their visits helps us to get weapons even faster and in bigger quantities.
Більше і швидше отримати зброю.
I cannot help but ask you about your personal life. Where were you and how did you find out about the full-scale invasion? What did you do first? What was the hardest part?
It was on the 23rd, because at home it was already the 24th. Here it was February 23rd. On that day, I had a speech planned in advance for the oldest women's club. It's a very famous women's club with a long history, and it includes a lot of very influential women from different strata of the population. We had this discussion there. That is my speech and the discussion questions. There was a large room full of people. Back then my entire speech was about why we need more weapons, more sanctions and more help for Ukraine to keep Russia from attacking. You understand that at that time we were all already actively working to deter Russia from what it was obviously already preparing for. And right after the speech, almost immediately, my husband and I didn't stay for a dinner. Putin's speech had already been announced, and it was clear that unfortunately this was the day that we were all not just hoping, but working very hard to prevent it from happening. So we came home, I changed my clothes, went to work, and we spent that day at the embassy.
You were already awake.
Yes, already at the embassy. So a new phase of our work at the embassy began.
Your house in Ukraine is near Kiev in Vorzel. Did you have anyone there at the time of the invasion? Maybe relatives, children, your family?
Of course, my mother. Well, children were here with me.
Your children were with you?
Yes, but my mother, my husband's father, who was still alive at the time, and my sister. I mean, a lot of people.
This territory was occupied. Did your family leave immediately?
My husband returned home almost immediately. He flew home the next day, and for the first few months he was constantly in Ukraine. And fortunately, he managed to organize the evacuation of my mom and dad, in fact, a few hours before the Russians occupied Vorzel. And the next 33 days, of course, were difficult. But once again, we constantly remember that a lot of our Ukrainians are still under occupation and have been there for more than 16 months. Even looking at our personal experience and what we know from our neighbors, from everyone, this horror that was happening, everyone saw it in Vorzel, in Bucha, in Irpin. It just gives a complete understanding of why we need everything we need to liberate all our territories territories as soon as possible. Every day under their occupation is the suffering of our people there.
Since the full-scale invasion, what challenges have you faced? Do you remember the hardest thing? What was the most difficult in these first days?
The first weeks, first of all, of course, despite the fact that we were preparing for different scenarios and we knew how to act in each of these situations.
Is it possible to predict them?
Of course, everything cannot be predicted for any of us. We lived during the war and, of course, we remember the beginning of this war in 2014. But a full-scale invasion is a completely different level of challenge. That's why we immediately started having daily briefings with our General Kremenetsky. We invited him simply because it was very important to inform the world about what was happening. All the information that the General Staff provided us with, the Ministry of Defense provided us with, was translated quite quickly at the beginning. We went with it to briefings, tried to share it, firstly to inform everyone to work actively with our partners, secondly to dispel the myths that were based on. You know that even among our closest friends and partners, the United States is a country that had been actively helping us from the very beginning. But even here, 400 years of Russian propaganda is 400 years of Russian propaganda.
That is it.
And for the first week, I heard questions on the air and listened to people saying that experts predict that Kyiv will fall in 3 days, in a week. Perhaps the hardest thing was not to burst into tears or get furious when answering questions, but to continue calmly and sometimes even with a nice smile or something else to explain why this is not true. No, we will not surrender. We need weapons, sanctions, and so on. I mean, I think the first months were emotionally difficult because of this. But I can say that first of all, our president, who impressed the whole world, starting with his phrase that he needed weapons, not transport, and ending with the moment when he came out and said, "We are all here, we are not going anywhere. We are all here, we are all fighting."
Всім добрий вечір. Leader фракції.
Good evening, everyone. The leader of the faction is here. The head of the office of the president is here. Prime Minister Shmyhal is here. Podolyak is here. The president is here. All of us are here to defend our independence, our state, and we will continue to be there.
Всі ми тут захищаємо нашу незалежність, нашу державу. І так буде й далі.
Glory to our men and women defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.
And here is the president, our defenders at the front, our people who have simply shown such incredible heights of unity and mutual assistance. These people who took children and women out at the beginning of the full-scale war to Poland and then returned. This incredible mutual assistance within the country. All of this gave our entire diplomatic team the opportunity to make a huge breakthrough here as well. When, very gradually, this mainstream, the world's great second army, Russia, Kyiv will fall in 3 days.
Such suggestions and such powerful propaganda.
We need to look for ways to save Putin. That is, all these experts, this mainstream gradually began to move aside. And there appeared more and more of those who said the same thing as we said. We began to see them on most TV channels, most expert discussions, and so on. It was not easy, it was not fast, it was constant work.
But all of us saw it. We were all worried about it. We saw how slowly, how extremely slowly this machine was turning around. Because there is no war here. It's quiet here. And how can you understand that it's not quiet every day there? And how can it be possible to attack an independent country with tanks in the 21st century?
Here I have to express our big gratitude to all journalists, both Ukrainian and international journalists. If we analyze it, this is what makes the situation in 2022 very different from the situation in 2014. In fact, the enemy is the same and attacked us just as insidiously. But the fact that this time every camera of every TV channel in the world was there, exposing to danger their own lives. So many journalists we have already lost. Near Irpin, near that bridge there, at the front now, near Kyiv. But the fact that the world here saw that was really happening there didn't allow anyone this time to say that, well, maybe there are two sides. It was so obvious and clear. And the American people, for whom the issues of dignity, justice and independence are vital, when they saw this, which is why we see Ukrainian flags everywhere, so the American people kept telling their politicians, no, we cannot let such a horrible act of injustice go unanswered, because these people are just like us. They are for democracy, they are for freedom, they are defending their homes, their people, their children. Wouldn't we do the same in such situation? We would. And this is a very important element. The fact that the United States was able to see through the eyes of journalists what was really going on.
How have you been able to maintain this interest in Ukraine for so long? Because we know that the war is tiring when nothing is actually happening here, when rockets don't fly above your heads.
First of all, this is of course a big team that is working on it. But first of all, you have to talk among other things about what Americans are interested in, about things important to them. It's necessary to pay attention to the events that are happening here. It's important to pay attention to American holidays. It's important to do interesting things together. We constantly organize a lot of cultural events. In fact, every week, here at the Ukrainian House, there are events about Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian cuisine, Ukrainian art, or our veterans. So, of course, we talk about the war through the prism of this. But we also talk about our artists. We talk about our famous figures. On Shevchenko's Day, we talk about Taras Shevchenko's incredible friendship with Ira Aldrich, a black actor from the United States who was not a slave but could not make a career at the time. They met in St. Petersburg, and it was a story that was not quite famous, but it was an incredible story of friendship between two men who were suffering. One was a serf, the other a black man who couldn't realize himself in his country at the time because racism unfortunately was everywhere. We talked about Mykola Krychevsky. We had an exhibition of Mykola Krychevsky. I remember very well when we had this exhibition, we were telling people, look, here is our super artist Mykola Krychevsky, who was born in the Kharkiv region, studied with his father, also a famous artist Krychevsky, and then moved to Kyiv. And then he moved to Bokchai to study in Western Ukraine, and then he moved to Prague. And then he co-founded the French École de Paris. Why did he leave the Kharkiv region?
Who was he running from?
It's about the fact that the Russians in 1980, after our independence, which we didn't return, starting in 1990, were advancing. That's why he was running away. Through the prism of this, we opened for Americans, not that they heard about us in the Soviet period, in the Russian imperial period, but our real history. And this history unites us. And this is constant work. I can say that the task of an ambassador is to represent Ukraine here and share our culture and try to get people's attention with this culture. Nowadays, despite the fact that the priority is weapons, sanctions and assistance to us, this part of the work is very important. It constantly keeps Ukraine in focus. It constantly allows us to tell something about Ukraine and also remind them about the war that we have to win in order to preserve what we have in common, in order to say that Ukrainians can give the world culture.
The Washington Post called you a woman who never sleeps. The article also says, although you work incredibly hard, you still manage to attend social events, but always with the same goal in mind, to meet famous American people, to talk about Ukraine and to get them to help Ukraine. And often people even line up to listen to you. What do they ask you about most often? Maybe you have some story to tell us.
Well, you know, in Washington, as in all capitals, all evening events are not only entertaining parties in the evening. This is an opportunity to communicate in an informal atmosphere with those with whom you communicate at your work. It is an opportunity to sometimes reach out to those whom you cannot always reach during.
Those influential people.
Exactly. That's why in Washington, these super famous dinners in Georgetown or various cultural events that are organized by a lot of foundations that help a lot of various cultural ones, or the Kennedy Center, or those who love opera. But if you look at the boards of these institutions, there are a lot of businessmen, there are a lot of politicians, there are a lot of internationally recognized figures. This is a golden opportunity to interest them in what is happening in Ukraine through the prism of their interests and hobbies. For example, we have performed at the Kennedy Center with our ballet company and new orchestra called the Freedom Orchestra, which was organized by our super masters who found themselves outside of Ukraine and gathered in a new orchestra and perform here. And when we show this, on the one hand, we surprise everyone that opera and ballet in Ukraine are at the world-class level.
I know because Lyudmila Monastyrsk just performed at the Metropolitan Opera and it was so melancholic.
It's incredible. We recently welcomed the Cossack System Band, and just yesterday we had Taras Yanitsky, our super virtuoso bandura player. And this resonates with the society, but it also gives you the opportunity to talk to people on an informal level and build relationships very strongly. If we look at the time of the full-scale war, but before that, because I started my service in the United States in April of 2021, there is actually no United States ministry with which we have no established extremely close relations. The number one task for me when I first arrived here was to establish very good and trusting relations between all the ministries, not just between the presidents, where we have a great dialogue, good relations.
At every level.
Yes, at all the levels. The Minister of Finance with the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Energy with the Minister of Energy, the Minister of Trade with our Minister, and it works. We can solve so many issues precisely throughout the open lines of communication. We have constant discussions.
Personal connections are very important.
Very important. Incredibly important.
Не можу не запитати, я бачу, що ви любите брошки.
I can't help but ask. I see that you love brooches. Today you're also wearing a very symbolic, beautiful one. A stunning Ukrainian butterfly with a small trident. For you, they are always not just a piece of jewelry, but symbols. How do you choose them? Where does this love come from?
Of course, what you say is important, but in fact, for an ambassador, what you wear is also a message. And you can see that I wear a lot of Ukrainian jewelry. I brought it with me, made out of beads,
Jordans, I've seen them.
various kinds, yellow and blue, Jordans. This allows you to have a little bit of vyshyvanka on you, even when you're not wearing it. Of course, I wear a lot of brooches and pins. Sometimes they have a political message, like F-16s or our flags with the NATO element. As a rule, I wear our angels that reminds us of our children who were kidnapped by the Russians. I actually wear them very often. Like today, I was wearing it too, but at one meeting I took it off and gave it to my counterpart. I give them out very often, these angels all the time. This brooch was given to me by our residents of Odessa. On the one hand, it's nice, and of course, I always wear Ukrainian and American flags to official events, and I have our embassy pin, and I have an American pin that speaks up and is actually a pass to the State Department. But during this time, my collection of brooches and pins have been constantly replenished.
You mentioned angel brooches and their meaning. How do Americans generally perceive this barbaric story of the abduction of Ukrainian children, thousands of children they take away to their country?
This is exactly the way it is perceived. This is a crime that is recognized not only by the International Court. As you can see, the International Court has moved faster and further in this crime than in other ones, of which a huge number have been recommitted by Russians. This is a crime in which Putin has already been named a criminal, which he is. We've had several hearings in Congress on this, in the Helsinki Committee and others. We have several resolutions registered in the Congress that deal with this particular crime, the abduction of Ukrainian children. It's something that resonates with everyone here, and it's something I can't even wrap my head around words. Outrageous. It's outrageous because it's a crime that a normal person can't even understand. How can another person do this? Who are these people who kidnap children?
This country, this is kidnapping.
Who are these mothers who kidnap these children? Who are the people who are engaged in over-education, that is, the abuse of children? This is indeed a clear sign of genocide. What the Russians are trying to do against us. This is a crime for which there will never be forgiveness. I'm sure that responsibility for this particular crime, as well as for others, is absolutely inevitable.
The terrorist country does not shy away from anything and invests huge amounts of money in propaganda, as we have already mentioned. How do you deal with this challenge here in the United States? Because Russian propaganda is everywhere, in music, in culture, and in literature.
It's a huge task for all of us. We have embassies, consulates general, and our honorary consuls working here, but a huge amount of work is done by our community. That is, we do it together. Why? First is a quick response to all the fakes and propaganda that arise. There are a lot of us, and everyone is doing their part of their field. People of culture. As soon as they see that some Russian artists are coming here or something else happens, the community, the professional community immediately reacts. They contact us. That is, we try to highlight these things immediately to stop them.
Can you tell us about something that has impressed you so much lately?
The later is, for example, our constant struggle for a month now with National Geographic, which consistently forgets to add Crimea back to where it was, is and will be. Despite the enormous work that the community is doing and we are doing, the number of letters we have already written in a constant dialogue.
And we will fight back the Crimea.
And we will correct the maps. Yes, we will. But, for example, there is huge work to be done in universities. So many centers of Russian and Eastern European culture in many universities or in other cultural institutions have been funded or created by Russian oligarchs. Or, of course, Ukrainian culture is always showed in there somewhere.
It was just added up to the Russian one.
Well, that's how they see it. And there is a huge amount of work that they were constantly doing that was very generously funded and so on. Unfortunately, just as we had all these Russian cooperation organizations in Ukraine and so on, these clubs existed here as well. That is, the Russia House, fortunately, is closed here in Washington and is not active. But not all of these pro-Russian people who...
But their spirit is still here.
Some even disguise themselves as Ukrainian, some disguise themselves as we are against the war, but not all Russians are bad. There are many such shades of pro-Russianism here, and in fact, some of them are fighting for the easing of sanctions. Some of them are deliberately trying to denigrate the work of the Ukrainian community, and so on. That is constant work. Look, it's not to say that there will be a moment when we can say, "Phew, we already overcome everything." No, there will be no such moment. We understand that in the world the struggle for truth, like the struggle for democracy, is an ongoing process. However, this once again confirms how important cultural diplomacy is. Because it's one thing for us to find, track, write about and pay attention from the embassy perspective, but it's another thing when people see Ukrainian singers, dancers, historians who are telling stories and giving giving excellent lectures. Here are American historians. In this regard, Timothy Snyder is a great man because he popularized Ukrainian and tells the true Ukrainian history, not as a concerned Ukrainian, but as a world-class historian.
A researcher who...
A researcher. Here are Ukrainian studies. Recently, by the way, we were very happy when the Wilson Center opened a new Ukrainian research direction. So there is no such thing as just do this and everything will be fine.
More and more and more.
It has to be done constantly, all the time. And our activists are doing a great job of renaming paintings, establishing their authenticity. A group of activists in New York is doing a great job. It took us a long time to finally get Korolov not to be signed as a Russian scientist.
Russia and Russians are no longer perceived in the same way here in America. I saw, for example, Russians hiding their badges at the conference. I mean, they're not as arrogant as they used to be, and they don't behave so brazenly.
Так зверхньо, як раніше, і так би нагло.
Definitely. I remember when I was still the Minister of Finance, how arrogant they always behaved at all annual meetings. When the Russian delegation came, it was always very large, very loud, and could be heard from every corner. It is and should be shameful to be criminals. This is how we communicate with all our colleagues. I want to say that in most countries, even in those that abstain from voting somewhere, both on a professional and on a human level, people have access to information. They see what is happening. How can you shake hands after that?
Does the woman who never sleeps, according to the Washington Post, find time for her personal life? Do you have time for yourself, even a little bit? For your family? Do you see them?
Чи бачитеся ви з ними?
For me, it means for my family at the same time. Of course, I try to spend all the time I can spare when I am not working with my husband, when he is here, because he actually lives with me between Kyiv and Washington, and with the children to communicate.
Are all the children here?
Yes, they go to school. The younger ones who live with us.
А батьки
Is your mother in Ukraine or here?
Yes, in Ukraine.
How do you communicate with her?
By phone, and when I visit her, recently, when the president gathered us for a meeting of ambassadors, of course, it was also an opportunity to see all of our relatives.
What do you miss the most from Ukraine here?
Україні. Тут, за Україною.
Perhaps I miss my family the most. The streets of Kyiv, Podil.
Do you like Podil?
Yes, the coffee, because I think that Kyiv has the most delicious coffee. But mostly I miss Ukraine as a whole.
За всією.
You got your master's degree in the Kyiv-Mohyl Academy, then you did an internship at the World Bank, and then you studied at Indiana University and got your master's degree in finance and trade. What did these years of study, these student years in the United States give you?
Студентські роки навчання в Сполучених Штатах.
They gave me a lot of insight into this country. I mean, I spent 2 years in the Midwest in Indiana. This is a very traditional American state, quite similar to Ukraine in some ways. The agricultural state of the USA. On the one hand, with very nice people who greet you on the street, is a little bit similar to my family on my mother's side and my summer spent in the village in the Odessa region. But these are, people who work so hard and love their land. The university itself, Indiana University, is consistently ranked in the top 5, top 10 universities in the public finance. Therefore, it was extremely interesting to study. Extremely interesting teachers, professors, and fellow students, some of whom we are now cooperating with because they hold certain position in the administration, but also understanding the country not from the point of view of a tourist, but when you live in it. can say that during these 17 months, there are people whom I knew either professionally or with whom we had different points of view, but we could sometimes communicate. That is, we were never friends. But I found some comfort in that fact that I stopped communicating with such people. Those people for whom it is not clear. Those people who even at this time do not understand why it is necessary to get rid of all these monuments. And it is not only about Lenin, Stalin, but also about Pushkin. Those people who do not understand that if you do not work 100% for your country, then you are not working.
So you're not working for the country at all?
Those people who don't understand that now Ukraine and our independence is such an unconditional value, without which all of us, yes, you can try to be successful somewhere, you can try to build a life somewhere, but we have only one Ukraine. That's why it was probably such a revelation for me. At the beginning, maybe it was not entirely comfortable, but then I realized that this is how I feel now, and it will probably be my new zone of comfort.
Що нам, українцям,
What do we, Ukrainians, need to do to win?
перемогти?
Because we know that we will win. I'm sure of it. But what do we, Ukrainians, have to do to ensure that the world does not abandon us and continues to help us until we win?
This is such a tricky question, you know?
To finish our conversation with,
I think we need to believe in ourselves, because we not only surprised the whole world, we also surprised ourselves. And we need to believe that it's not just because of the war, that this is really the best thing we have. And we need to not only preserve it, but believe in it, cherish it, and develop it as much as possible. I think we need to be kinder to each other. This unity is very important.
not to lose it.
If we analyze history, history teaches us very clearly that every time we have been united, we have won. And as soon as Russia managed to separate us, we immediately lose. We just have to understand this. And we need to understand that we need to be unbearable and uncompromising towards our enemies, both external and internal. But not towards those who simply have a different point of view but are also patriotic Ukrainians. We need to find this unity, of course, and keep it and help each other and support each other. And we need to understand that our path is clear. The European Union and NATO. We need to understand that the road to all institutions is as important as membership in them. But also we need to bear in mind that in order to continue on, to be equal among equals, we need to work very hard. We need to be self-sufficient. We need to actively restore and respect Ukrainian business. If you look at this tragedy that is being discussed, including the one on the recovery, in the energy sector or in other sectors, it is a question of independence.
Independence.
And on the other hand, it's about our importance to others, what we can give to the world. Ukraine can be a solution to many global problems: food, nutrition, and energy. That is, we must become as important to the world as European world values are to us. And this is a constant work. And here, to conclude for me, for example, a very important additional, let's say, my passion is to help the Kyiv Mohyla Academy, the UKU. Because I believe that we also need to think about education all the time. Education is something that is important for future generations.
The future of our Ukrainians, those who will build Ukraine.
We need to do everything we can, not only to win now. If we want to win in the future, we need to do everything possible to ensure that our children, especially, now we understand how difficult it is, how much children in Ukraine have experienced that not every adult, in fact, can and should experience such things.
And they're still going through it.
They still do. Here, at the Ukrainian House, we have a number of programs, including helping children with the prosthesis. Just a couple of days ago, we sent Yana Stepanenko and her mother Natalia home, who had been undergoing prosthetics here for a year under our program. We have an art therapy program where we help those centers at home that provide art therapy. This is important. It is very important for us that our future not only copes with this pain, but also that future Ukrainians are super educated, speak several languages, that they all know in addition to native Ukrainian, English, French and other languages of the European Union, where we are heading, that they all are IT savvy. And then Ukraine will become that you and I, our parents, our grandparents, all generations of Ukrainians who fought for Ukraine dreamed of. And I hope that we will see it with our own eyes.
To conclude, we have a traditional short blitz. What superpower would you like to have if you were given the opportunity?
Ви хотіли б володіти?
To get enough sleep for a shorter period of time.
What day in your life would you like to repeat and live through again?
There are many such days. Well, probably the birth of children. There are a lot of family days that I would definitely like to live in again.
What is your favorite dish?
Borscht. I'm very traditional here.
A book you would recommend that everyone should read?
There are a lot of books, but the last book we also presented here is by Eugene Fischel, called The Moscow Factor. It's a book by an American author, a State Department official, which shows very clearly how this Moscow factor has influenced American policy and why it is so important to take it out of the equation in order to start making not just fair, but right decisions in relation to our region.
What does Ukraine lack now for an absolute victory?
Weapons, aid, more weapons, more aid, more sanctions. The recipe is clear.
Why are we sure to win?
Because the light always wins.
What is your point of support now?
Probably it's my family.
What will be the first thing you do after we win?
Після нашої перемоги.
After the victory, if I have an opportunity, I would like to have a vacation, to spend at least a few days with my husband.
Постійно з чоловіком.
And without a phone.
That's probably not going to happen.
Дякую.
Thank you very much for this conversation, and I really believe that the Lord is helping you and Ukraine. And we, in the end, will do everything to be heard and helped, because without the help of the United States in particular, it is difficult for us to achieve this long-awaiting and dreamed-of victory over the Muscovites.
Таку довгоочікувану і омріяну перемогу над московитами.
Thank you very much. We all wish victory, and may God bless our defenders. Thanks to them, thanks to their daily deeds, we can work here in Ukraine, in different cities, and bring our victory closer.
We talked today about diplomacy, war, and the unbreakable female power that brings us closer to victory with Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Ukraine to the United States, Oksana Markarova.
Америки Оксаною Маркаровою.
We are preparing new, interesting acquaintances for you. See you next time.